Hey everyone, it's Magnus Carlsen's birthday today. I believe he's 29. So what better way to celebrate than to go through one of his games played last year in St. Petersburg in the World Championship Blitz against a potential future world champion, Alireza Firouzja, the 16-year-old chess prodigy. So in this game, Magnus was white and Firouzja is black. Magnus kicked us off with 1c4 and black played the move g6. And after g3 bishop g7, Magnus played bishop g2, both sides fianchettoing, and Firouzja playing knight to f6, so going for a sort of King's Indian defence. White plays knight to c3, black castled, Magnus played knight to f3, and black played d6. So Magnus tries to take some of the centre with d4, and this is a very typical King's Indian type setup already. Perhaps usually knight bd7 is played by black, but Firouzja went for knight c6 instead. This is still very much playable. White castled, and now black strikes out with the move e5. So this is quite a typical idea in the King's Indian, to play this e5 move and then follow up with maybe a knight to e8 and then an f5. So white can play the move d5 here to hit the knight. Usually it drops back to e7 and white can play e4, but play continues with knight d7, white can play knight to e1, and of course black hits with f5, white plays knight to d3, and black plays knight to f6. And the main moves from here are bishop g5, h6 and takes, and play would continue from this position with chances for both sides. So usually black gets a kingside attack, and usually white should try and get a c5 in at some point to undermine the centre and also the queen side. But back to the game, so e5 was just played, but Magnus decides to just take this pawn off with d takes e5. Black could have tried to take with the knight, but I think Magnus would have taken, and after black takes just play queen c2. And this bishop on g2 is exerting some pressure on this b7 pawn, so probably black will be forced to play the move c6. And white would continue maybe bishop g5 to pin the knight. After h6, rook d1, queen c7. White may drop the bishop back to c1. And this is quite an even game at the moment. So, very strategical. Magnus certainly likes this in long games and he excels at it. But in Blitz it's kind of different. So maybe both sides didn't really want to go for a more positional game. For this reason, Firouzja took on e5 with the pawn. Magnus now pinned the knight on f6 with the bishop, and black developed the bishop to e6. So now we get into the main part of the game. The bishop is attacking the pawn on c4, and the point is that now black can follow up with knight to a5 and exert even more pressure on the c4 pawn. So this limits white's next move. They can't play queen to b3 because of this knight coming into a5. So Carlsen opts for queen a4 to protect the pawn with the queen. And I'll be honest, Firouzja's next move had me a bit stumped. In the game he played queen to b8, and okay, so this queen now gets off the diagonal of this bishop on g5, but I'm not sure what queen to b8 does exactly. I'm not sure if black is trying to maybe potentially play b5 at some point, but it seemed more logical for black to play queen c8 and get on this white diagonal with his bishop on e6. And after rook d1, now play knight d7 because it's unpinned. After b3 to protect the c4 pawn, h6, bishop e3 and a5. This is actually given as dead even by Stockfish, but actually I actually prefer black's setup here because this queen looks a bit offside to me. And if black can somehow get a knight on c5 or b6, they're doing very well. So yeah, queen b8 seems a bit of a weird move to me anyway. But they've unpinned their queen, and Magnus now just took on f6 with the bishop recaptured, and Carlsen played a very good move, knight to d2, threatening to play knight to e4. So the point is, if black just ignores this with a move like rook to d8, white can play knight to e4, attacking the bishop, and if it drops back to g7, then knight c5 is ridiculously strong. White's threatening to take on e6 and double the pawns on the e file, and also threatening to take on b7 and take on c6 after that as well. So Firouzja drops the bishop back to stop White hitting knight to e4 with a tempo, and Carlsen plays rook f to d1 to gain the open d file. Firouzja contests this with rook to d8. Now Magnus now played knight to b3. Knight to e4 may have been possible as well. It was actually quite a strong move, and Black's best move here was actually to play rook to d4 to hit the c4 pawn. So White is forced to play b3, and Black's best move is queen f8 in this position. White can continue with e3, and after takes, bishop f5, knight d5 and rook d8. The rook pins the knight on d5, but White is ever so slightly better in this position. For instance, White can play the move a3 and proceed with b4 ideas and try and infiltrate Black's position on this queen side. But back to the game, Magnus indeed played knight to b3, so preparing knight to c5. Firouzja now played knight to d4. Maybe trying to trade the knight off on b3, but Magnus obviously isn't going to do that, so he plays knight c5. And the point is that now two pieces are hitting this b7 pawn, and the knight on c5 is also threatening to take on e6. To defend everything, Firouzja now played the move c6, so the b7 pawn is now safe. But Magnus now has a nice tactic with the move e3. The point is, if the knight moves to f5, White will continue knight takes e6, and after f takes e6, White can follow in with knight to e4, and Black has these two horrendous doubled e pawns. And you wouldn't want this against Magnus Carlsen because he'll eat you for breakfast in these type of positions. Play can continue queen c7, but then rook takes d8 can be played, and if rook takes d8, there's queen takes a7, and if queen takes d8, there's moves like rook d1 to gain the open file, and after queen c7, rook d2, followed by queen to d1. And these type of positions are very easy to play for someone of Magnus's stature, so White will have no issues converting this game. So after White played e3 in the game, Firouzja now played bishop g4, attacking the rook on d1, and Magnus now took the knight on d4. And Black has two choices. Black could take on d1 with the bishop. After rook takes d1, he takes d4, knight to e4. White has the two knights for the rook, and play will continue b6, knight to d3, b5, takes, and queen c2, and White has this pretty much under control. I think Firouzja played the more testing move, e takes d4, attacking the knight on c3. The knight jumps into e4 anyway, and the bishop takes on d1, followed by rook takes d1. Firouzja continued queen c7, and White played queen to b3, so attacking this b7 pawn. Firouzja played b6, and the knight dropped back to d3. And here I think Firouzja should have played the move c5 to connect all their pawns together. Okay, they're conceding the white squares, but this seems like the best option for Black at this moment. Play might continue a3, king h8, and h4, h6, knight to d2. Rook a b8 because the rook's under threat from the bishop, and queen to a4, attacking the a7 pawn and gaining control of the white squares. Bishop f8, rook e1, bishop d6, and h5, g5 and b4. Okay, so White is still infiltrating Black's position, but I think it's better than what happened in the game. Just because after knight to d3, Black played rook a b8, and this allowed Magnus now to play c5. So it stops Black's pawns from being connected together. B takes c5 is played, and then queen c4. So the knight on d3 does an excellent job of protecting b2, and also actually defending the b4 square from the rook. Firouzja played queen a5, and Magnus took on c5 with the knight, and the bishop moved to f8. But now you see White's just in complete control. They play the move b4, so attacking the queen, supporting the knight on c5, and White just has two pieces for the rook. Okay, Black does have an extra pawn, but White could easily pick these off if he needed to. Firouzja played queen a3, And actually Magnus finished black off here with knight to e5. So the queen's attacking f7 with the knight, and also the knight and the bishop are attacking c6, and this looks like it's undefendable. Firouzja played queen takes b4, and Magnus finished the game pretty much with queen takes f7 check, king h8 is forced, and Magnus played queen to f6, and bishop g7 was played. Now it's actually an excellent combination that Magnus missed here. He could have played the move knight to f7 with check. If king g8, there's a nice move queen e6. The point is that there'll be discovered check if the knight moves. For instance, if bishop f8, there's knight takes d8, check, king h8, and queen e5 check, king g8 and knight c6. And if queen c4, there's bishop d5 check, and black's got to give up the queen. So after knight to f7, there's also another combination. For instance, king g8, queen e6 again. If black decided to play rook e8 to attack the queen, there's a nice finish. Check, king h8, queen g8, rook takes, and then knight to f7 is checkmate. So in this position Magnus could have played knight to f7 check, but he opted for queen to g5, which is still rather safe. The point is black can't take this knight on c5 because then knight to f7 check, and it's a discovered attack. So I'll quickly show that actually. Just if queen takes, it's check, the king moves, and queen takes queen. That's pretty much game over. So after queen to g5 from Magnus, black played rook to e8, attacking the knight on e5, and Magnus took on c6, forking the queen and the rook. The queen jumped in to c4, and knight takes b8 was played, queen e2, and Magnus played queen to d2, and black resigned this game. Just because black's probably forced to take queens off, and then probably forced to take this knight, and there's not really anything that black can do to save this game. White's just a whole piece up, and someone like Magnus will easily convert that. Thank you for watching the analysis of this video, and again, happy birthday to Magnus Carlsen. And if you enjoyed my analysis, please drop me a like, comment or subscribe to the channel because it helps very much, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. See you later.